Welcome to yet another session with me. Today we are going to begin with the story Packing. Now, Packing is an extract which is actually picked up from the novel Three Men in a Boat, and this novel has been written by Jerome K. Jerome. Jerome K. Jerome was generally called J by his friends. Among his friends, he was just called J. Now, in this story here, in this extract, this part of this extract, we are going to talk about um, where they are going to pack for their vacation, for their holiday. And their holiday is going to be on a boat. They will be boating on the river of Thames, as you see it's here, and they'll be going from Kingston to Oxford and back to Kingston again. Now, Jerome K. Jerome had two more friends along with him. They were George Wingrave, commonly known as George, and William Samuel Harris, commonly known as Harris. These were the three friends who were going for the boating holiday. Along with them, they had a dog which belonged to Jerome K. Jerome, belonged to J, who was called Montmorency. Well, let's just begin with the story. Let us read about three friends who are to go or who are going to travel and who cook up a homemade adventure, trying to pack their bags for it. Now, before their journey, they are going to do the packing, and let's see all the adventure that is going to happen during their packing time. We made a list of things to be taken, and a pretty lengthy one it was. Before we parted that evening, the next day, which was Friday, we got them all together and met in the evening to pack. We got a big Gladstone for the clothes and a couple of hampers for the victuals and the cooking utensils. Now, parted away means moved away. They are moving in a different they live in a different house, so they parted away. But before parting, they had made a list of their items which they had to carry for themselves. They had to carry those things for their holiday, so they had made a list which was very, very huge. And before moving apart or before going to their own houses, they made that huge list. And the next day, which was Friday, they began their packing on Friday, and they got a big Gladstone. Gladstone is a bag or a case named after former British Prime Minister William Gladstone. That's a huge bag to keep your stuff inside that. And for clothes, and a couple of hampers for the victuals. So those bags or those baskets for the food items and the utensils had to be kept. We moved the table up against the window, piled everything in a heap in the middle of the floor, and sat around and looked at it. Now, they had to assemble everything, so they emptied the room. The table which was in the center was moved towards the window, and they kept their things in a huge pile there in the center of the room, and they started with they started looking at it, and that the packing had to begin then. I said I'd pack. Now, who is this I here? It's Jerome K. Jerome. It's Jerome. J is speaking these words. I said I'd pack. I rather pride myself on my packing. Packing is one of those many things that I feel I know more about than any other person living. It surprises me, myself sometimes, how many such things there are. I am impressed. I impressed the fact upon George and Harris and told them that they had better leave the whole matter entirely to me. They fell into the suggestion. Fell into the suggestion means they agreed to the suggestion. And with readiness, that had something uncanny about it, something very strange about it. George spread himself over the easy chair, and Harris cocked his legs on the table. Cocked his legs means you sit on the chair and you keep your foot in front of the table and you just cross your legs one on top of the other and you sit in an easy way. So George was in an easy chair, and Harris was on a chair with his legs on the table, and he had cocked his legs there. George spread himself over the easy chair and Harris cocked his legs on the table. This was hardly what I intended. Jay did not want this actually. He just wanted to boss around and order Harris and George how to do the packing. But it was taken in a different way. This was not what actually Jay had wanted. This was hardly what I intended. What I had meant, of course, was that I should boss the job and that Harris and George should potter about under my directions. Potter about means to move around, to follow instructions as per Jay would say. I was pushing them aside every now and then with, "Oh, you, here, let me do it." There you are, simple enough. Really teaching them, as you might say. Their taking it in the way they did irritated me. Now, how did they take it? They took it in a way in which Jay did not want. They thought that Jay would do the entire packing, so they left the entire job for Jay to do. But that was not what exactly Jay wanted. Jay wanted to order them and they had to follow, but that's not the way it was going on. Their taking it in the way they did irritated me. There is nothing that irritates me more than seeing other people sitting about doing nothing when I'm working. I lived with a man once. Now he is talking about a man that he must have stayed with sometime long ago. I lived with a man once who used to make me mad that way. He would loll on the sofa, means relax in an easy, comfortable way. He would loll on the sofa and watch me doing things by the hour together. He said it did him real good to look on at me messing about. Now that other man who was sitting on the sofa used to just sit and relax on the sofa doing nothing and just looking at Jay. And what fun did he have? Just to see the fun what Jay made, how Jay had made the mess all around. Now, I am not like that. I can't sit still and see another man slaving and working like a slave. I can't see it. I want to get up and superintend, means supervise, and walk around with my hands in my pockets and tell him what to do. It is my energetic nature. I can't help it. However, I did not say anything, but started packing. It seemed a longer job than I had thought it was going to be. But I got the bag finished at last, and I sat on it and strapped it. That means he had finished his packing and then he shut the bag and he strapped it. Those belt kind of bags initially you had to strap it out, you had to lock it up. So he finished his part of packing, and he strapped it. "Aren't you going to put the boots in?" said Harris. Now that was something being very naughty, isn't it? "Now, aren't you going to put your boots in?" said Harris. And I looked around and found I had forgotten them. That's just like Harris. He couldn't have said a word until I got the bag shut and strapped, of course. Means it was Harris's nature to do something mischievous like this. He could have said it once before Jay had finished his packing and before he had strapped the bag, but he didn't do that. Just to irritate Jay, maybe just to trouble Jay, he said it after he had been after he had finished his strapping of the bag. And George laughed. One of those irritating, senseless laughs of his. They do make me so wild. I opened the bag and packed the boots in. And then, just as I was going to close it, a horrible idea occurred to me. I had... what was the thing that had... He packed the boots inside the bag. He was just going to strap it up again. Just before that, an idea clicked his head. What was that thing? Had I packed my toothbrush? I don't know how it is, but I never do know whether I've packed my toothbrush. Means he never remembers whether he's packed his toothbrush or not. He always tends to forget about his toothbrush. Now he talks about his toothbrush. What happens when he is traveling and when he needs to do his packing? What happens with him and his toothbrush? My toothbrush is a thing that haunts me. Haunts me means that keeps coming to my mind again and again. Those thoughts, those fearful thoughts, they keep coming to his mind. That haunts me when I'm traveling and makes my life a misery, real pain. I dream that I haven't packed it and wake up in a cold perspiration, sweating, uh, cold fear, a cold perspiration, and get out of the bed and hunt for it. And in the morning, I pack it before I have used it and have to unpack again to get it. And it is always the last thing I turn out of the bag, and then I repack and forget it and have to rush upstairs for it at the last moment and carry it to the railway station wrapped up in my pocket handkerchief. So this is the thing that used to happen every time he traveled. This toothbrush, the thought of toothbrush always haunted him. Every night he used to dream that he's not kept his toothbrush. So the first thing in the morning, what he did was, when he woke up, he went and kept his toothbrush in his bag, packed it up, and then he realizes he's not brushed his teeth. So he has to take it out again. And this time when he takes it out, he forgets to repack it. In the end, he used to rush upstairs to this room and then check whether he's kept the toothbrush, and as usual, it is there only. So he used to take it in his pocket, wrapped in his pocket handkerchief, and then he used to go to the railway station generally. So this time again, that same thought. Had I packed my toothbrush? That was what was in his head. Of course, I had to turn every mortal thing out now, and means every little thing from the bag, I had to turn it out, bring it out just to check whether he's kept his toothbrush or not. Everything out now, and of course, I could not find it. I rummaged the things. Rummage means searching in a very haphazard manner, not keeping things properly there. I rummaged the things up into much the same state that they must have been before the world was created and when chaos reigned. Means he's talking about a time when the world was not systematic, it was not properly organized, when things were absolutely in a mess and chaos. It was that time, he's comparing it with that time then. Of course, I found George's and Harris's 18 times over. What? When he was looking for his own brush, he found theirs at least 18 times. He got to see their brush, but not his own. But I couldn't find my own. I put the things back one by one and held everything up and shook it. Then I found it inside a boot. I repacked once more. When I had finished, George asked if the soap was in. I said I didn't care a hang whether the soap was in or whether it wasn't, and I slammed the bag shut and strapped it. Now, after he had found his toothbrush, it's Harris again who's irritating him this time and asking him whether he's kept the soap or not. And this time Jay is really irritated and he says, I don't care whether I've kept it or not, but he shuts the bag and he strapped it and found that I had packed my tobacco pouch in it, and it had to reopen. Means he didn't bother much about the soap, but his tobacco pouch, which was very important for him, though I suggest tobacco is not good for health, that should be avoided. But those days they used to keep that tobacco pouch with them always. So he saw that he has packed his tobacco pouch also inside. So again he had to unpack and check his tobacco pouch out. I got shut up finally at 5 past 10. That's just near about 10 o'clock, 5 minutes over 10 o'clock, he had finished his packing. And then there remained the hampers. Now these clothes and other things were packed. Now it was time for hampers to be packed. The hampers to be done. Harris said that we should be wanting to start in less than 12 hours' time, and thought that he and George had better do the rest. And I agreed and sat down, and they had to go on. So far, was packing up things and creating that mess. People, the other friends of his, were irritating him and disturbing him by telling him one thing or the other, whether he packed his boots, whether he's kept his toothbrush or not, whether he's kept the soap or not. And then he got to know that he's kept his tobacco pouch inside. So a lot of chaos was all around. And now it is time, when George and Harris, they volunteered that fine, now we will do the packing. So Jay takes a back seat and relaxes and tells these people to go ahead. They began in a light-hearted spirit. They were very happy doing it. It was a good fun for them to pack the things. Evidently intending to show me how to do it. Evidently means it was quite obvious. It was quite visible that they were trying to show Jay how to pack things now. Evidently intending to show me how to do it. I made no comment. Now who is this I? It's Jay. I made no comment. I only waited. Now what do you think he waited for? He actually waited for some mishappening to happen. Something chaotic to happen. Let's see. I only waited. With the exception of George, Harris is the worst packer in this world. And I looked at the piles of plates and cups and kettles and bottles and jars and pies and stoves and cakes and tomatoes, etc. and felt that the thing would soon become exciting. Now, what do you think that exciting thing is going to be? Maybe they might begin with some mess, some problem, and it's there in the very next line. It did. So something exciting did begin. And what was it? They started with breaking a cup. That was the first thing they did. Terrible, isn't it? That was the first thing they did. They did that just to show you what they could do and to get you interested. Then Harris packed the strawberries. Then he packed the strawberry jam on top of a tomato and squashed it. And they had to pick out the tomato with a teaspoon. Now, the strawberry jam is kept on the tomato. The tomato is squashed, it's squeezed out. So obviously it becomes a little smudgy, so you cannot pick it up with your hand. They used a teaspoon to do it. And then it was George's turn, and he trod on the butter. He trod means he walked on the butter. So the butter was in his slippers. He trod on the butter. I didn't say anything, but I came over and sat on the edge of the table and watched them. It irritated them more than anything I could have said. Had Jay said something, it would not have been so irritating as much as his just sitting on the table and watching them and seeing and doing such a messy kind of thing with the things there. It irritated them more than anything I could have said. I felt that. It made them nervous and excited. And they stepped on things and put things behind them. And then they couldn't find them when they wanted them. And they packed the pies at the bottom and put heavy things on the top and smashed the pies in. So they being nervous, they exactly didn't know what they were doing. They were making it a complete mess with the pies at the bottom and heavy things on top. Complete chaotic inside their hamper back there. They upset salt. Now they dropped salt in that also. They upset salt over everything. And as for the butter, I never saw two men do more with 1 and 2 pence worth of butter. Means so much that amount, little bit amount of butter, and 2 men making so much of chaos there. I never saw 2 men do more with 1 and 2 pence worth of butter in my whole life than they did. After George had got it off his slipper, now what? The butter. After George had got off that butter from his slipper, they tried to put it in the kettle. Now they needed to keep it somewhere safe so that it doesn't get smudged. So they tried pushing it inside the kettle. It wouldn't go in, and what was in wouldn't come out. Now, first when they tried putting it in, they saw this is actually not possible. So just little bit had gone inside. But then now they wanted to pull it off. But it was not coming out easily. So they had to scrap it out. They had to use maybe a spoon or knife or whatever to pull it out. It wouldn't go in, and what was in wouldn't come out. They did scrap it out at last and put it down on the chair. And Harris sat on it. And it stuck to him, and they went looking for it all over the room. So you can well imagine where the butter has been stuck, just behind Harris. "I'll take my oath I put it down on the chair," said George. Means, I promise I put it down. I swear I put it down on the chair there. I take an oath I put it down on that chair, said George, staring at the empty seat. He had kept it there, but the seat was empty now. The butter was not there. "I saw you do it myself. A minute ago." Not a minute ago. Means it's not even a minute that I saw you doing it, said Harris. Then they started around the room again, looking for it, and they met again in the center and stared at one another. They could not find it in the room. "Most extraordinary thing I have heard of," said George. "So mysterious," said Harris. Then George got round at the back of Harris and saw it. "Hey, why, here it is all the time," he exclaimed indignantly. Indignantly is actually with a little bit of anger, and a little bit of when something wrong happens, you're with a harsh tone then. "Why, here it is all the time," he exclaimed. Now, when he is looking back at Harris and he's speaking, he's "here it is all the time." Now, Harris can't find, so he's turning around and just to see where he's talking about. "Where?" cried Harris, spinning around. "Stand still, can't you?" roared George, flying after him. And they got it off and packed it in the teapot. Finally, the butter from Harris's back was removed and it was kept in the teapot this time. Initially, it was the kettle in which they were trying to put it in, but now finally they kept it in the teapot. Okay, let's see what happens further. Montmorency. Now, if you remember, Jay had a dog named Montmorency. So, let's see now what Montmorency has to do here. Montmorency was in it all. Of course. Montmorency's ambition in life is to get in the way and be sworn at. Sworn at means be scolded at. He loved it. A dog loving all this. Just imagine. Get in the way and be sworn at. If he can squirm in anywhere where he particularly is not wanted and be a perfect nuisance and make people mad and have things thrown at his head, then he feels his day has not been wasted. Means, just imagine a dog wanting to be scolded, wanted to be thrown things at and talked in a harsh voice. That was the main aim that he had. His day was successful if somebody had done something that rude to him. To get somebody to stumble over him. Now, when people are working in the room and a dog walks by, it's obvious you stumble over, you fall over. To get somebody to stumble over him and curse him steadily for an hour, for continuous 1 hour, he had been troubling these people there who are packing. Steadily for an hour. It is his highest aim and object, and when he has succeeded in accomplishing this, his conceit becomes quite unbearable. Conceit is thinking himself to be a very proud kind of a person, pride in oneself. He came and sat down on things. Just when they were wanting to be packed, and he labored under the fixed belief that whenever Harris or George reached out their hand for anything, it was his cold, damp nose that they wanted. Now what happens? He is wanting, Harris and George are packing something. So they go and try to pick up those things. But before that, Montmorency is sitting on those things. So when they reach out their hand to pick up those things, Montmorency feels that they're coming to touch his cold nose there. So he goes and sits somewhere else, onto something else. Now when they need to pack that something else, so they go and pick up, they reach out their hand, and again Montmorency feels they're coming to pick his nose, cold nose. So he runs away again. Okay. Now, whenever Harris or George reached out their hand for anything, it was his cold, damp nose that they wanted. He put his, now see further what all Montmorency does. He put his foot in the jam. Inside that hamper, he put his foot in the jam. And he worried the teaspoons and pretended that the lemons were rats and got into the hamper and killed 3 of them before Harris could land him with a frying pan. Now, Montmorency puts his foot in the jam, and then he feels the teaspoons are there struggling inside. He feels the lemons, he pretends that they are rats, and he kills the 3 rats. Killing the rats actually means he must have squeezed the 3 lemons there. Now, Harris is getting really angry, so he picks up a frying pan and right on Montmorency, he lands it right there. Harris said, I encouraged him? I didn't encourage him. A dog like that doesn't want any encouragement. It's natural, original sin. Sin is doing something wrong. It's natural, original sin that is born in him that makes him to do things like that. They're really, really angry with the whole thing happening there. The packing was done at 12:50. And Harris sat on the big hamper and said he hoped nothing would have been found broken. George said that if anything was broken, it was broken. George said that if anything was broken, now he is already fed up. Now it doesn't really matter to him whether something is broken or not broken. So George said that if anything is broken, it was broken. Which reflection seemed to comfort him. This thought within him comforted him. He was quite relaxed with this thought that let things be broken if they are broken. He also said he was ready for bed. We were all ready for bed. Means Jay, George and Harris, all the 3 were now ready for bed. It was just hardly 12, maybe 10 more hours. They would sleep the night and then wake up in the morning and be ready for their journey to move ahead. So that's what they say. We all were ready for bed. Harris was to sleep with us that night. Means Harris would not go back to his own house, but he would sleep there with Jay and George that night. So that morning they get up together and move. Harris was to sleep with us that night, and we went upstairs. We tossed for beds and Harris had to sleep with me. So Jay and Harris had to sleep together, whereas George had his own bed to sleep there. So we tossed for beds and Harris had to sleep with me, he said. Do you prefer inside or outside, Jay? Now, suppose you have the wall and the bed is right there. Some people want to prefer sleeping inside. Some people prefer sleeping outside on the bed. So, I said I generally preferred to sleep inside the bed. Harris said it was odd, something very odd. Generally, people wanted to sleep on the outer side, but Harris found this very odd. George said, what time shall I wake you fellows? Now, he was the main person who was very particular with getting up in the morning. So he used to wake up others most probably. So he says, what time do I wake you fellows? Harris said 7. I said no, 6. Because I wanted to write some letters. Now there is a tiff. There is a fight between Harris and Jay. Harris says wake us up at 7. Whereas Jay says no, I have letters to write. Wake us up at 6 o'clock. Harris and I had a bit of row over it. Had a row means had a fight over it. But at last, split the difference. Split the difference means they agreed to a time, something in between. Neither his nor mine, nor 6 nor 7, somewhere in between 6:30. and said 6:30. Now, what happened here? Meanwhile, George was already off to bed. He had asked them the time, but they started on to a fight as to settle down on some time. So they were fighting. Meanwhile, George was already off to sleep. Now, once they finished with their fight, when they mutually agreed upon one time, that was 6:30, they informed George about it. But George was already asleep. Let's see. Harris and I had a bit of row over it, but at last split the difference and said 6:30. Wake us at 6:30, George, we said. Do you think George was there to listen to him? George made no answer, and we found on going over that he had been asleep for some time. So we placed the bath where he could tumble into it on getting out in the morning and went to bed ourselves. Now, one more last naughty thing that they did here was George was already asleep, so they kept the bath there just beside his bed. So in the morning when he gets up, he'll land up in the bath itself, in that bathtub most probably, and he would get really angry and wild, and finally he would wake these two fellows up again. So that's how Jerome K. Jerome, an extract from one of his, has been picked in the heading given here is packing. We talked about the packing part of it. You go through the entire novel. Do read the novel to get more fun and adventure. I hope this sequence of the packing part was very, very enjoyable to all of you. Thank you so much.